All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Kraus, your Embraer Learning and Development Specialist, and welcome to our Managing Remotely webinar series. Today's session is Managing Meaningful Team Meetings Remotely. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a minute, but first I'd like to take care of a little bit of light housekeeping. So Alan, if you could switch to the next page.
Yep, give me a sec.
There we go. All right, guys. So I see that everyone has done this already, but I'll just make note. Please mute your microphones and disable your video. Thank you for doing that. We will have time at the end of the session for a Q&A. So if you could just hold the questions until the end of the session. Please make note of it though as we go along. If you have a pen, paper and pencil, sorry, do that. We are going to see if we can do the group chat. That's the way we normally do it, but since we've got a small group today, we may just open up the audio at the end. And just a reminder, the session is being recorded, including our chat area. So the recording will be available in Empower later on today. And then after the webinar, we ask that you complete the post-session survey. We get a better understanding of what you're looking for in webinars. This specific topic is actually was directly taken from all the comments we got from the last Managing Remotely webinar. A lot of people asked for this, so we are offering it. And so please, at the end, and we'll remind you at the end, please complete the survey. All right, so today our guest speaker is Alan Bernstein. Alan is the owner and chief HR consultant at HR Office Savers. He is in Melbourne, so he's a local to the Melbourne area. More than 25 years in HR and is a senior certified HR professional with SHRM. And we would like to welcome you back, Alan. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate being here. Thanks for having me back. And I appreciate that lead-in also on the last meeting we did and some of the feedback, the questions. We had really good conversation after too. Yes. So that was great. And I'm glad to be able to do this. So welcome and thank you, Embraer folks, for being here. Today's meeting, as Chris mentioned, the title we gave is Managing Meaningful Team Meetings Remotely. So I put intentionally the word remotely in parentheses because managing team meetings is such an important part of what we do as leaders throughout any organization. And there are some nuances to doing it remotely. So what you may see today are some standards that maybe you're already accustomed to with some specific thoughts you can put around remote and some best practices specifically for remote. So we'll go through that. I broke it out into 4 topics. We've got reviewing best practices for leading remote team meetings. I included a piece in there on facilitation. We're also going to cover communication. Just about every presentation I do has something in there about communication. And then we'll have tips and strategies for keeping the meeting on track. So first thing we're going to talk about is leading remote team meetings. Just because your employees aren't right in front of you doesn't mean you can't have an effective meeting. Sometimes we think that. We think that when they're not right in front of us and we can't touch, feel, hold, have that direct eye contact, it's not the same thing. And while it may not be exactly the same thing, we still have to run our business. So this is hopefully going to give you some good tips on how you can help manage that and some of the things you should look out for. So I came up with 6 best practices that I thought might be helpful for you. You might see these are things I can take back when I'm back in the office. True. These are also things you might share with peers or your team itself. Maybe some of the things you learned today are helpful for your home process as well. If you've got a house full of folks doing homeschooling, hopefully it's almost over, and other things. So first thing you got to do is prepare. That should be a gimme, but I promise you it's not. You need to think about the meeting's purpose, what you're trying to accomplish, what goals, desired outcome. Really think about what the point of the meeting is, even more so than in person, because when you're remote, it takes extra to get people engaged and to keep them fully focused. Send your agenda and background material in advance. I know that when I was an early manager in my career, I didn't always do that. I felt like that might be something that would give away the secret sauce, but as you mature in management and leadership, you realize that enabling people with information is helpful. So do it. It's even if you just send an outline, it gives your team something to think about. Start and end on time. Another obvious when you say it out loud, but how often do we do that? So when you think about starting and ending on time specific to virtual or remote meetings, I want you to think about it. You still start on time, but you kind of lead into it. Maybe the first minute or 2 minutes is a little bit softer. Give some folks a little bit extra time to get in. It's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more grace. Same thing with ending on time. Start winding down when it's close to the end of the meeting. If you see yourself going over, create an opportunity to create a second meeting or have follow-ups. Make sure all your attendees can participate. There's the baseline participation of technology, no doubt. But beyond that, just like any other face-to-face meeting, sometimes you get people that dominate a conversation. Sometimes people that might normally be outspoken in a meeting aren't as comfortable speaking out loud when they're remote. So encourage your participation. Make sure everyone is comfortable participating and they're able to, and you don't have 1 or 2 people just dominating a meeting. Keep a written record. You always want to take notes during the meeting so that you can, number 6, follow up. Maybe it's not you that takes the notes, maybe somebody else on your team does, but you always want to keep track of what the meeting encompasses, what the action items are, and what the next steps will be. Remember too, in a remote meeting, more so than in person, scheduling is an issue. If you're in the office, you're basically captive, right? I mean, certainly we have things that we do personally that we have to deal with, whether it's a soccer game or a doctor appointment or what have you. But if you're remote, it's just, while not exponentially harder, it's harder. We've got home issues, we've got scheduling issues, maybe you've got time zone issues that you're dealing with, which you probably have to do in the office also, but maybe more so remote. Maybe you've got different meeting times people have to worry about. So be a little bit flexible. Some people say that you should stagger meeting times. I don't know that I fully agree with that. I think you should have a scheduled standard meeting, whether it's a team meeting once a week or once every other week at the same time, same day. Standard meetings should be standard, but if you're going to have extra meetings outside of a standard, be flexible with when they are, especially if you've got time zone issues, whether it's national or international. And personally, I've always tried to avoid Monday morning and Friday afternoon meetings. When I do meetings, when I'm part of a meeting, there's so many things going on Monday morning when I get back, even though I check my email Sunday night. So having those Monday morning meetings makes it harder. And especially remote, you've got folks in a home environment with more Monday morning and Friday afternoon that encompass a little bit more of their time. Just kind of be sensitive to that. During the meeting, be proactive in guiding your audience's attention, voice inflection, eye contact, how you present yourself. It's so important because people are going to multitask as much as you don't want them to. It's a reality of the situation. If you're leading the meeting, be a good leader and mute yourself when others are speaking. Think about what happens in a regular meeting. If you're leading, people normally look to you for guidance. And so you might naturally, that's right, good point, just add some verbal support and comfort to your team. That can be distracting on a virtual meeting. People are thinking that maybe you're the leader, you got something to say, you want to interrupt, and legitimately so. But if that's not the case, do yourself a favor and mute yourself. Maybe you talk to a mute and you just let that person continue their part of it. Know enough about the tech to troubleshoot a technical issue quickly. Unless you're actually a technician within Embraer, a help desk person or somebody, you're not expected to understand the whole process, but know enough about muting, know enough about entering the meeting, know enough about if you hear a problem somebody's having on the call, if it's the whole group or just you or just them, know enough about how the technology operates to quickly troubleshoot and either move on or fix it. Watch how you position yourself on webcam. You're leading, so make sure that what you have around you is legitimately professional, whatever that might mean for your certain group. Make sure the camera's not pointing straight up into your nostrils or your eyes and the glare behind you is clear. And of course, dress appropriately, which is different for every group, every department. I dress the way I dress when I present. Plenty of times, golf shirts or whatever it might be, just whatever it appropriately is. Being on a remote meeting and especially leading a meeting is not an opportunity or a reason to dress down. I want to transition leading a meeting to facilitating a meeting. They're subtly different. Leading a meeting is taking you through the agenda point by point. Facilitating is having the meeting organically happen. That's the easiest way I can describe it. So you're encouraging group motivation, you're making the most of your group knowledge. Maybe there's more than one answer. You need an actual conversation from folks. Many leaders do this automatically. It's just what we've learned to do over time, watching other people, observing, and just being good managers and leaders. But there are opportunities to be just a facilitator. And these are some ways where that becomes appropriate. And if you think about the hybrid model, there's that both. Are you facilitating part of the meeting and leading the rest of it? So just kind of know that there's an opportunity to make a more effective remote team meeting through facilitation. If you're just going to give a rundown of something, maybe you don't even need a meeting. Maybe you just send an email for that, or you call one person and you have them flow it down. So think about turning your meetings into more of a facilitated effort where you get more participation and you help solve bigger problems. Remember, your focus too as a facilitator, you're going to be, if you're a manager, if you lead the department, you're a content expert. You know the content, but a facilitator is more focused on process, which means you have more of an opportunity to sit back, see how it runs, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about when it's appropriate. But think about the focus of a facilitator. If you're going to facilitate a meeting, you're not directing traffic, you're letting your folks drive the car. Then we'll talk about, talk about communication. I want to run into what we think about with communication, how we think about what we think about. When we think about communication, we usually think about speaking, right? Voices and how we're looking and feeling. But if you ask someone who's hearing impaired, they might think of sign language. If they're visually impaired, they might think about Braille. So communication might mean different things to different people, and we'll cover that. When we think about communication and we define communication, you've got speech, signs, writing, interchange of thoughts. But it also could be just like in biology, communication when organisms just touch or feel, or they communicate with each other without words. They communicate with each other in a way that they change behavior for each other. So communication can be defined in a variety of different ways. And then we get into how we communicate. So if we think about communication, the definition of communication, and then we think about how we communicate, this particular piece talks about verbal and paraverbal, but there's really three different ways I want you to think about. We're going to focus on this spoken communication, but you've got also nonverbal, right? So pointing fingers, thumbs up, crossing your arms across your chest, tone, or your eyebrows furrowed. The nonverbal communication can tell a story also, as well as written communication. This type of presentation has all of that involved between the video we have and the PowerPoint you're looking at and the words I'm speaking and the questions we'll have later. But let's focus more specifically on verbal and paraverbal. And as you think about paraverbal, you've got the actual verbal of a sentence. So just in your seats now or wherever you are, as you think about this one sentence with 6 words, just say out loud to your muted computer, I didn't say you were wrong. I didn't say you were wrong. I didn't say you were wrong. The inflections and the emphasis on words change everything. And you can probably underline each of these words. I didn't say you were wrong. I didn't. I mean, how do you say? So this paraverbal says a lot about the types of communication issues that we have with our teams. It's so much more pronounced on this type of video because you can't see the whole body. You can't see legs moving or crossed or other surroundings environmentally around where we are now. All you see is what you see here. So it's much more important to have these types of pieces buttoned up. As we think about communicating out, let's think about communicating into what we hear, the active listening part about communication. And there's 3 areas. For first, try to identify where the other person is coming from. So think about the frame of reference. You know, an example we've used for understanding frame of reference is if you see a bear, well, is the bear in the zoo or is the bear camping in the woods? And where you see that bear, that frame of reference can have a lot to do with understanding what that communication, what you're listening for. Listen attentively, eye contact, that goes into responding appropriately too, but attentively. Don't sit with your phone that I'm pretending to listen. I mean, you're listening, right? So look in the computer, hear what people are saying, have that type of engagement. And then, of course, respond appropriately, non-verbally with a question, paraphrasing. Some people think paraphrasing is repeating back what they've heard. It's not. Paraphrasing is, this is what I heard you say. It sounds like you said, I heard this, I'm interpreting. It's a way to help someone understand what you heard in a way that makes sense for you, that you can actually create some kind of solution with. Here's some tips for you on listening better. So there's probably a gazillion we can put on a sheet, but I picked the top 7 that I like. Listen, don't talk, right? 2 ears, 1 mouth. Avoid interruptions, especially irrelevant interruptions. Try to talk less than you might normally. So this says 10%. What does that mean? Is it 90% listening? Sure, that would be great. If you could listen better more than you talk, that's really helpful. And you're not going to do all of these, but maybe 1 or 2 of these resonates with you. Your conversation should be relevant and related. It should be part of the discussion, not something that takes you off into another tangent. Try not to offer advice. We do that all the time, right? We always try to fix things instead of just listening. Be aware of your environment, the noises around you, the paper shuffling. I remember working on one of the early times where I was in a meeting and one of my employees, one of my folks on the team was leading the meeting, and he put his folder of paper on top of the speaker, and every time he shuffled a piece of paper, everyone could hear that, and it was so loud and so annoying, and he didn't know, right? We can't hear it in the room, but other people could hear it. So those are the types of things you got to be aware of, not just what's right in front of you, but around you. And of course, take notes. And then these are good keys that I want everybody to kind of think about, whether you're an employee, an employer, you're running a meeting, you're listening. I wrote this really for managers to communicate down with their folks so everybody stays in touch, but you can use it anywhere. Communicate early, often, and honest. Stay in constant contact, open and frequent. So some things you can do are like schedule regular meetings. Don't make assumptions. Ask questions. You want to know if somebody's late to a meeting, don't assume why. If somebody is acting a certain way, just like at a regular day, we want to ask questions. Set up email protocols for communication: when, how, who, what's appropriate. Don't assume that your folks know that even though they're remote, they have to follow the same rules that they might while they're in the office. You want to confirm that, make sure they know. Provide company support contacts. Most of the folks you need when you're in the office are right available on your speed dial on your phone or right down the hall. So you want to have a list of folks that you know to reach if you have help, need help with HR, with phone contacts, whatever it might be, and make sure your employees have that too. And do yourself a favor and give your employees, if you can create a contact list for your entire team, do it. But at least give your employees your personal contact information so that they know how to reach you if some emergency comes up and they can't catch you on your office phone. Meetings are going to go awry. They always do. Most of us have some kind of tactic to keeping them on point, whether it's a very directive, hey, we're going off point, let's get back, or it could be something more subtle. Here are some tips that might help you to keep a meeting on track as you go through. So first, I want to talk about why you might need to intervene, because not every meeting is going off the rails, even though it's not following the agenda. So if you are going off the rails, you're not following the goals, it's important to intervene, get the meeting back on track. If the process, the group process, the respect for each other, the talking in turn, if things aren't going properly to get to where you need to be, intervene. Maybe there's an issue that's escalating, somebody's dominating a conversation or not listening to other people, or they're in a way irate or not professional, intervene. And maybe you want to sample a skill to the group. Maybe they're going in a certain direction and you want to say, wow, that's so good, and here's how I would like to see it done. So intervention, whether you're facilitating or leading, might be important to do. Addressing the disruptions, here are some ideas. Refocus the discussion on the agenda. Identify the intention of the disruption, right? Let's make sure we seek to understand versus be understood. Let's figure out what's happening with the disruption. Let's get our head around how it's happening, why it's happening. And then if we need to come back and reiterate the rules or potentially set up a new rule, if you've created, we used to have this one rule, which I was never really completely fond of, but it seemed to work, that if somebody in the group legitimately thought that somebody else was leading the meeting in a different place, we had a 3-knock rule. We knock on the table 3 times, and that meant, let's take a pause, and are we going in the right place? If you were talking, you hated it. Nobody wanted to be interrupted. But the rest of the room, the vast majority of the time, that worked. So what we ended up doing is we had this rule, and if it didn't work, then maybe we created another rule, which was somebody raised their hand. So use those as opportunities to help keep yourself on track. Getting people back on track. Some tips for you on what you can do to get people back on track. These are more subtle, right? Not a lot of this is going to be in your face. Hey, you're messing up. Or we have we have this one current meeting where we have online, we use Zoom for one of my networking groups, my HR networking groups. And if you go over your allotted time, the leader presses mute. And you don't even know that sometimes if you're speaking because you're so focused on this. So it's extremely rude, but it works because nobody wants to hear somebody else go off when they're trying to keep to the time. So that's kind of something I wouldn't encourage everyone to do. But if you want something softer, review the agenda. Hey, everybody, I think we're getting off track. Let's get back to the agenda. Reintroduce the correct topic. Oh, that's a great conversation, but I think we were talking about this other topic. So let's talk about that. Maybe there's an offer to put the off topic in a parking lot. Great idea. I love what you're talking about. Let's save that for another meeting. I'll put it in my own parking lot, or we'll set up another meeting. Maybe it's an actual great conversation. It's off topic and you're enjoying the conversation as the facilitator or leader, and you're not sure you should change because it's actually solving a different problem that you didn't even know you had. Stop and ask the group if they're finding the discussion helpful. Is this something we should continue? And something else you could do is simply ignore it and reintroduce the correct topic, of course, in a correct way. When there's a pause, okay, great discussion, let's get back. So there's various different ways you can say it, do it, be it. If you just be ready for, I think that's the key too, is what I've learned to do is you're ready for interruptions. You're ready for the tech to not work. You're ready for people to interrupt. You're ready for something to not be right. And you just have to react in a way that's professional and help your team get back on track. So I'll close with some quotes that I pulled that I thought were somewhat relevant to this type of topic and that I just like. So Yogi's my favorite. He always has something funny to say. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. How true is that? And Dwight Eisenhower, plans are nothing. Planning is everything. We've heard nobody plans to fail. We just fail to plan by Covey. I think that was. This is similar. And of course, Jonas Salk, the reward for work well done is the opportunity to do more. We hear that a lot as subordinates too, is, you know, when I want to rate, no, but this is a good way to think about how we continue to grow and learn and run meetings. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Chris.
Alan, thank you so much. This is really good information. I would love to open this up to the group. So if you would, and since we're such a small group, let's open it back up. We just unmute yourselves and ask questions. And actually, Alan, if you could go back to the quotes, that would be great. And we'll just hold it on this for a second, and then I'll remind people about the survey afterwards.
Sure.
But, all right, so guys, what questions do you have for Alan?
Or discussion topics. Anybody have a best practice they want to share? Something they saw on my slides that has worked for them, or maybe don't agree with even, that they find doesn't work and they've tried something different?
Hi, this is Ophelia from Mesa, Arizona.
Hello.
I have a comment on regards to the communication when doing meetings. I know that sometimes we would like to be seeing everybody's faces because we can get some feedback on what we are talking about, you know, by looking at nonverbal clues. But then because of the technology, it is always better, they say, to put your camera turned off, and so then you cannot see. So what would you recommend in those cases? That it's a remote meeting, that you cannot see the other people's faces.
Yeah, so I have some meetings going on now, and I have some clients that are the same way for confidentiality reasons. We don't do any cameras, it's just voice. We might even be on Zoom and everybody's camera's off. So my advice, I have two pieces for you. The biggest piece of advice I would give you is find a reflection that you can look at while you're talking. You'll see your own voice, you'll see your own head, you'll actually find yourself. It's interesting if you do it. You'll sit up a little bit straighter. You'll have your chin up a little bit more. You'll be talking to the mirror. And what that does for you is it makes you feel like you're actually talking to someone else, even though you're talking to yourself. I will caution you, it's weird at first. So you probably want to practice it a couple of times because you're talking to yourself like you're going crazy. But if you have a mirror or something to look at, the next thing is, you know, every group is a little bit different and every organization is a little bit different in how they run things. And with the camera off, you have to just pretend it's on and pretend that people, and assume that everybody is listening, that they're doing their part, and at the same time assume that you have to keep them engaged. Just like a regular meeting, if you're not engaging, they won't be engaged.
Thank you.
What other comments do we have or questions for Alan?
Alan, hello everybody. This is Mona Garcia from Embraer BDL. I'm sorry, my thing doesn't stop popping out. I really enjoyed the meeting. Actually, nowadays we have to learn how to put this meeting together through Zoom or Teams, and it's amazing to learn. Also, I would like to ask you, when like you give the opportunity to someone, and then like, let's say like you're saying like all that your topics, and you're telling what's going on and how we have to handle our meeting, and then someone gets to you and doesn't give you the word back. How you take the word back to you and to be more proactive and on time? Because sometimes I found difficult that people, if I run a meeting, they will enter the conversation and they will run the conversation. That's where I found difficult to get it back, like without not being unappropriated.
Yeah, there's and especially if it's somebody above you or in a different department that you don't work with regularly. If it's a subordinate, you can be a little bit more directive. So I'm assuming you're talking about a non-subordinate. You're talking about you're in a meeting, you're leading the meeting, and somebody's just running with it.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, and you know, those types of disruptions are going to happen. Normally, if you can create upfront, so the best thing you can do upfront is create that agenda and that expectation. Now, sometimes these folks come in after you've said all that, and it's too late, and they never heard you say, we're going to take turns, everybody gets a few minutes, and remember, we're remote, so let's be careful about how we run the meeting. What I've learned to do is I wait for that breath, and I'm listening to what they say, but I'm listening. You're supposed to listen with the intent to understand. But in those cases, you said Mona, right?
Yes.
Right, Mona, in those cases, I'm listening for an opportunity to interrupt. So I'm listening for an opportunity to use a segue to say, you know, speaking of interrupting, Mona, let me just jump in for a second and bring us back to the agenda. Well, I have one more thing. I get it. I understand. But let's bring it back to the agenda. We have other people on the meeting, and I think it would be helpful if we talk just about the agenda. And there are going to be times when folks are just not self-aware enough to pay attention to that, or in some unfortunate cases, just plain rude. And that's where you probably have to escalate after the meeting at some point to someone, whether it's your own supervisor or somebody else's. But during a meeting, if you can listen for opportunities for somebody to breathe and transition back to the meeting, that's what I found is a good trick.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Cool. And Alan, if you would go to the next slide, we're at, and it's 1:29 now. I do want to make sure that I'm understanding of people's time. We have this scheduled till 1:30, but I'm happy to stay on. I think Alan can stay on
Sure.
for a couple more minutes. So if you have to go off, not a problem. I just ask that you complete the survey on this session. As I said, this session, the topic is a direct result of the session or the survey from the last one. So if you have your phone with you, your cell phone, just open up your camera, point it to this QR code, and the survey will pop right open. If it doesn't work for you, not a problem. We still want your feedback. I'm just going to send an email link after the session. And then if you could just go into that email, click the link, and do the session or do the survey the old-fashioned way. That'd be good.
Yeah, pop right into mine, Chris.
Awesome. I love this technology. I think this is just makes it so much easier for people to complete the survey, you know, live. So with that, I do want to open it back up, guys. If there's, what other comments do you have? I know I've got a couple things that really resonated with me, especially the nonverbal piece, Alan, that you were talking about, that I didn't know you were, or I didn't say you were wrong. I've seen that in other ways, and it is so true. Every single word, if you put the emphasis on that word, it changes the sentence completely. And people don't always see that they are doing that. You know, they don't always notice that they're putting the emphasis on a word that is taking away from the meaning that they're trying to convey. So does anybody else ever see themselves in that challenge, or you hear someone else saying it and you're like, I don't think they meant it like that?
Right.
You know, what other thoughts do you all have on that? All right, that's not a problem. I just find, especially when it comes to these online meetings, these remote meetings, that your communication is even more important than ever. The way you speak. So you just have to keep that in mind. I'm going to leave it open for any more questions or comments for Alan. All right. Well, everybody, Alan, if you want to go to that last slide. So Alan is happy to answer questions afterwards. I believe, Alan, you wouldn't mind people
sure.
giving you a phone call.
Not at all.
So Alan's phone number, his email, both are up there. You all have my email address because I'm the one that sent you the invitation. So
Right.
please, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts or whatever, share them with me too. And I want to thank you all for being on the call today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you all on the next one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. You too.
Too.
Thank you.